First flown on November 20th, 1915, this sleek, modern-looking giant of an airplane, nicknamed the Porte Baby, was the largest aircraft built and flown in Britain until May of 1918. Inspired by the Curtiss flying boats being developed in the United States, work had begun all the way back in mid-1914. Lacking engines with the proper power or reliability to give it the needed performance, it would have a very short production run and service life, but not one absent of excitement. I'm the Wolf of 1918, and this is the history of the Felixstowe Porte Baby. If you enjoy aviation history content like this, consider subscribing to get notified when I upload more videos, and leave a like or comment to help the video in the algorithm. Now, onto our regularly scheduled program. Before the war, John C. Porte had been working very closely with Glenn Curtiss in Hammondsport to design a flying boat with the ability to make it across the Atlantic. This project had been commissioned by Rodman Wanamaker to win the 10,000 British pound prize set by the Daily Mail in 1913 for the first to accomplish such a feat. The aircraft they were working on, the America, would eventually become the Curtiss H-4, but the start of the First World War would put a stop to any transatlantic flight plans. Porte, for his part, returned home to England and rejoined the Navy, being stationed at the brand new Royal Navy Air Station at Felixstowe. Having convinced the Admiralty to buy 2 of the America-type aircraft, he then set to work conducting his own seaplane hull trials, using the knowledge he had gained working with Curtiss. This would spawn a very successful line of British seaplanes, but that isn't the focus of this video. Rather a lesser known, and to some extent far more interesting, model will be. Due to the delay in getting the 2 Curtiss America model aircraft, Porte set to work in the interim experimenting with various hulls. Eventually, a proper airplane was built to run the first of these successes, aptly named the Porte 1 hull. It was fitted with wings spanning a total of 124 feet and 3 Rolls-Royce 250 horsepower V12 engines, all in a pusher configuration initially, although this would be changed at an unknown time to situating the left and right engines in a tractor configuration with the central engine remaining as a pusher. Officially designated number 9800, this brand new airplane was given the satirical nickname, the Porte Baby, by the men who worked on it. Initial tests of the prototype showed that it fared poorly while in the water, which is not something you want with a float plane. Luckily, it was quickly rectified by adding 3 feet to the total length of the fuselage, bringing the hull to a length of 56 feet 10 inches. The overall length of the aircraft, due to the large rudder, was even longer at 63 feet. This, along with the wingspan of 124 feet, made it one of the largest aircraft in the world. Taking flight for the first time on November 20th, 1915, the Porte Baby was able to reach a maximum speed of 78 miles per hour, which was high enough to pique the interest of the British War Office. And the aircraft manufacturing company began production of 20 through a smaller subsidiary company on February 16, 1916. During this time, Britain had been struggling with the Zeppelin menace terrorizing London. Several projects were underway as an attempt to counter the floating behemoths, but none had yet shown sign of a reliable defensive tool. One idea that sparked up after seeing the enormous Porte Baby was to mount a small Bristol Scout to the aircraft and conduct anti-Zeppelin patrols, allowing the Scout to detach in order to attack any enemy airship mid-flight. After much preparation, the day of the test arrived, April 6, 1916. Borrowed from the HMS Vindex, which had successfully launched the first airplane from an aircraft carrier during war just that past November, the Bristol Scout C would remain docile, engine off with the pilot, Lieutenant Day, to simply await for the time to launch. Once in the air, the pilot put the Scout at a slight upward tilt, allowing the freely spinning propeller to engage the engine, and then he released the slip, holding the small aircraft in place. Immediately, the biplane gained altitude, successfully accomplishing what may have been the very first example of a manned airplane being launched from another manned airplane. While many contemporary sources don't indicate a second test was undertaken, there was another shown in a single record written by Porte for May 17, 1916. However, this record is near identical to the one for April 6th, so it seems more likely only one test was done, with it either being accomplished on April 6th or May 17th. Whatever the answer, it is of no consequence, as no further tests were ever conducted and the idea was abandoned, much to the disappointment of J.C. Porte. Further experiments were conducted with the Porte Baby, such as the mounting of a 6-pounder Davis gun in the nose gunner's position, assumed to have been done for a potential anti-submarine role that was never realized. Another experiment, carried out in April of 1916, was the attachment of 2 14-inch torpedoes, one to each wing, and seeing how it flew. Engine trials were also conducted with the Porte Baby prototype, with one such experiment seeing the reconstruction of the aircraft and seeing the replacement of the original engines with two 310 horsepower Sunbeam engines in the tractor configuration, with the center push propeller remaining the original 250 horsepower Rolls-Royce. It was found, due to all propellers turning the same way, that the air blasting against the rudder gave it a rather intense turn to the left. A simple solution of swapping the central pusher engine with one swinging the opposite direction gave it a much better attitude in the air. A few months later, in July of 1916, the Felixstowe F2 would take its first test flight and show itself as a much superior craft, with higher speeds and better handling on the water, plus a cheaper craft to build. Due to this, all future orders for the Porte Baby were cancelled, and the aircraft in production were given low priority. This did not stop a few from entering service, however, and they still performed their duties reasonably well. The first production Felixstowe Baby entered service in November of 1916. Now fitted with the more powerful 360 horsepower Rolls-Royce Eagle 8 engine, the massive seaplane was able to reach speeds of up to 92 miles per hour. At least two production models had slightly different engine configurations, either two 250 horsepower Rolls-Royce engines and one 260 horsepower Green, or three 325 horsepower Rolls-Royce Eagle 7s. The data for these other variants, however, is missing. With an estimated empty weight of 14,700 pounds and a max takeoff weight of 18,600 pounds, it wasn't enough to justify the Royal Navy Air Service ordering more. Still, some use had to be found, and the giant float planes were sent to bases such as the one in Killingholme to fly patrols over the North Sea, looking for signs of German fleet movements or enemy submarines. These were very infrequent, and only a small portion of the 10 that entered service even flew a single mission. The aircraft were difficult and expensive to house, expensive to maintain, and expensive to fly. When one was flown from Killingholme to Catfirth, the massive hangar had yet to be finished, leaving the Porte Baby number 9807 to face the elements exposed. This resulted in its upper wing nearly collapsing after a storm, damage that was never repaired as the parts to undertake it were either never ordered or never sent to Catfirth. Another, sent to Firth of Forth, suffered engine trouble and had to sit dormant for months while repairs were carried out. It was only after the engines were finally in working order that it was discovered the hull had become badly waterlogged, so she never flew a single patrol. Many complaints were recorded regarding the difficulty of flying the lumbering aircraft, as well as the apparent impossibility to actually defend against any aerial assault. While it did have a Lewis gun up front with a decent field of fire, the other machine guns would have to be aimed through various windows and openings in the hull. Not exactly a great situation for a combat aircraft. This ended up not mattering too much, as only one of these aircraft actually saw combat on October 1st, 1917. Flying a patrol over the eastern English Channel, the Porte Baby, piloted by Flight Commander N. Sholto Douglas and Flight Lieutenant B.D. Hobbs, found itself under attack by three German seaplanes. These were the Brandenburg W-12, the very first time one would see combat, the Friedrichshafen FF-33L, and an Albatros W-4. By chance, the Porte Baby had an extra crew member aboard, giving them 4 gunners instead of the usual 3. This extra firepower kept the German planes from getting too close, and through the incredible skill of the pilots, the chase was kept up for more than 20 minutes. However, their luck would run out. Oberleutnant Zussi Friedrich Christensen, flying the Brandenburg W-12, dove from above and strafed the giant's upper wing, taking out the port and center engines. Spinkings, one of the gunners, had continued to fire even as the engines were being shot out, suffering burns when the engine he was closest to erupted into flames. With 2 of its 3 engines now inoperable, pilots Douglas and Hobbs brought it down onto the water, landing well enough to not breach the hull. Exposed and unable to get the German aircraft in their sights, the 4 gunners, and the 2 pilots, threw themselves onto the floor of the boat as the enemy seaplanes above began making pass after pass, riddling the giant aircraft with holes. Eventually, the Germans ran out of fuel or ammunition and left, leaving the miraculously alive crew to tend to their crippled airplane. Oberleutnant Christensen would take credit for the kill, marking his second in what would become a very prestigious fighter pilot career. The battered crew of the Porte Baby weren't about to give up, however, and they at once set to work trying to get the engines repaired as the sun quickly set. They were eventually able to get both damaged engines back into working order, although not able to get enough power to take off, or not wanting to risk flight with 2 severely damaged engines, so they ended up taxiing the seaplane across the channel, finally arriving at Orfordness the following morning, just as the sun was coming over the horizon. Having beached their aircraft, the exhausted crew once more came under sporadic fire. Apparently, a lone sentry had mistaken them for the start of the German invasion of England and sprung into action for king and country. Once again, Providence stepped in and the sentry was quieted by his comrades, allowing the men of the flying boat to go back to their base. battered, burned, and one with a bullet lodged in him. This dogfight convinced the Royal Navy Air Service that the Porte Baby was not suited for combat duty, and any remaining aircraft still in service were relegated to trainers. J.C. Porte doesn't seem to have cared much, as his interests were now focused on creating an aircraft of similar size, but far more capable. This would result in the creation of the Felixstowe Fury, which took flight for the first time on Armistice Day, November 11, 1918. With the war obviously over, focus from it being used in the military changed to that of finally accomplishing a transatlantic flight. But I'll save the details, and its tragic ending, for another video. The Porte Baby had also been surpassed in size by the Handley Page V-1500 that year, when the first prototype took flight on the 22nd of May with an astounding wingspan of 126 feet and a length of 64. Needless to say, the Porte Baby had gone from a prestigious achievement for British engineering to a mere footnote when one discusses the dawn of aviation in less than a year. By the end of the war, only 3 Porte Babies were still known to exist, and only 2 of those were still in service as a trainer, and they would be retired before the end of 1918. The other one of those 3 had been permanently docked, the whole used as lodging for drivers of the Women's Royal Navy Service. It apparently did this job well, as after the war at least one of the Porte Babies was carefully dismantled instead of scrapped, the whole being used as a women's hostel to accommodate more drivers of the Women's Royal Navy Service, reportedly having plenty of room for 4 to have their own hammocks, place to keep clothing, cooking, and mirrors. No known remains of any Porte Baby is still known to exist, and the fate of the hostel is unknown.